Here's what's coming up on your horizon. Here's what we know. Here in America, the rich are getting richer. But does that necessarily mean the poor are getting poorer? Today, we examine the issue of income inequality, and here are some very differing views on America's growing income gap.
I think that most Americans realize there's going to be some inequality. However, I think most Americans and most Oklahomans would be surprised to see how radical and extreme that inequality has become.
So if people are getting wealthy in a free market system, it's not because they're defrauding the rest of us. It's because they're generating wealth. They're creating wealth. And in so doing, they also create opportunities that the rest of us benefit from.
Stay with us for Oklahoma Horizon.
Oklahoma Horizon is made possible by the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology Education.
Oklahoma's investment in career tech provides more than nationally recognized technology education and training. It produces solid financial returns for the state's economic future. Oklahoma Career Tech, elevating our economy.
And the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping good people grow good things. And now, from the Career Tech Studios in Stillwater, here's your host, Rob McClendon.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining us here on Horizon. Well, Oklahoma's economy has outperformed much of the nation in recent years, but much of those income gains are going to the wealthiest households. There's a growing gap between the richest households and the middle class, an issue that is often referred to as income inequality. If you will, go back with me to 1976, the year of our nation's bicentennial. Gas was 57 cents a gallon, and the average American wage was $9,200 a year. And America's rich earned a modest 9% of our nation's income. Now, if you will, fast forward to today. That same 1%, which is often referred to as the super rich, they now take home 24% of all income, nearly tripling in the last 30 years. So that's what we make. But what do we have when you look at overall wealth, which includes our income as well as our assets, everything from our homes to our savings? The richest 1% accounts for 40% of our nation's wealth. Now, these again are the super rich, people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, with overall net worths not only in the millions, but often in the billions. But what about just the regular old rich, those people who make up the top 2 to 19%, which includes everyone from high-paid actors to athletes and successful professionals? Well, they make up roughly 53% of our country's wealth, leaving only 7% to the working middle class. So when it comes to income distribution, how does Oklahoma compare? Well, eerily similar. Today, Oklahoma has the 8th largest income gap between the high and middle classes. Now, since the 1970s, the average household income for the wealthiest Oklahomans grew right at 64% compared to just 16% for the middle class and only 5% for the poorest of Oklahomans. Now, that's since 1970. Now, more recently, income trends are not as dramatic, but in some ways, they're even more troubling. When you adjust for inflation, since 1998, lower incomes have actually fallen, while the top fifth gained a more modest 7.7%. The middle class, well, their incomes, they virtually stagnated and sit at 0%, while the poor, they actually lost 7.5% of their income when adjusted for inflation, which interestingly, what the rich gained, the poor lost. But is there a correlation here? Today, we're going to look at income inequality from two very differing perspectives. One that believes the growing income gap not only raises basic issues of fairness, it also affects our overall economy and social cohesion. While another one of our guests believes the growing gap between the rich and the rest of us is an indicator of the success of American capitalism, which is where we'll start right after this.
You're watching Oklahoma Horizon, featuring some of the good things that are happening in the great state of Oklahoma.
Well, with the changes in our economy this past decade, it is the middle class most often pinched by everything from the rising cost of healthcare and higher education to simple job uncertainty, which is where our first guest today says we should focus our attention when we talk about income inequality. David Azarette is with the Conservative Heritage Foundation. Well, David, when it comes to income inequality, there's a feeling out there that in a just system, we really shouldn't see this great disparity between incomes. But in listening to your talk, you say it's not the worry that a lot of people paint it to be. Why is that?
What the American dream promises is economic mobility, movement up and down the economic ladder, fortunes being made, fortunes being lost, people starting off poor, making it to middle class, people moving from middle class to upper class. What income inequality looks at is the static distribution of income at the end of the day. It tells you nothing about the opportunities that are available for people, whether or not they are moving up and down the economic ladder. So to me, if you care about what really matters, which is, can you still make it today in America if you work hard? Income inequality has nothing to do with that. I think what is ultimately fueling it is either a misunderstanding as to how economics functions, that thinking that it's a zero-sum game, that if the rich are getting richer, they've done so at the expense of the poor, which is not the case. Or oftentimes it's something uglier called envy, that you see this growing resentment against the wealthy. And I would argue that's not the way we look at the wealthy in America. In America, when we see someone who's made it, we think, by God, if I work hard, I'm going to get there too.
Now, you mentioned the zero-sum game, and what you're saying is that economics is much more dynamic than there is just this amount of money and how we divide it up?
If I had a magic wand and I could correct one economic fallacy in the world, it would be this notion that economics is a zero-sum game, that there's only one pie to go around, and that if I get a large slice, you're left with crumbs. That is fundamentally mistaken. The rich don't get rich at the expense of the poor. What you have in a free market economy such as ours is a system that allows you to grow the pie, to expand it as much as you want in order to serve everyone. So if people are getting wealthy in a free market system, it's not because they're defrauding the rest of us. It's because they're generating wealth. They're creating wealth. And in so doing, they also create opportunities that the rest of us benefit from. There are more jobs, higher wages, so on and so forth. So we really need to move away from this static view of one pie and how do we divide it up to a proper understanding of free market economics, which is how do we keep on growing the pie?
Is there a concern on your part, and I'll borrow a phrase, crony capitalism, where being pro-business means being pro-big business?
I'm not particularly crazy about the sentence pro-business. I think as conservatives, what we need to be is pro-free markets. Free markets benefit everybody. I'm fine with pro-business so long as we're clear that it includes all businesses, from the smallest mom and pop shop to the biggest oil conglomerate. What you often tend to see is that businesses are actually not pro-business. They're pro their own business, and they're in favor of regulations and laws that push out the competition. So I think this is a winning message for conservatives, and it's something, it extends well beyond conservatives actually, is we need to hammer away at this point, that we stand for free markets, and that means healthy competition and open opportunities for everybody. We need to be very mindful of crony capitalism, of corporate welfare, when big entrenched business interests hijack the legislative and regulatory apparatus to keep out their competition. That is unfair, and it's a profound distortion of what capitalism and free markets are about.
Let's talk a little bit about the American dream and really the American family and the disintegration that we've seen over the past couple of decades of the American family.
In 1970, about 10% of American kids were born out of wedlock. Today, that number, 40 years later, has shot up to 40%. Now, social conservatives and religious conservatives are rightly concerned about the collapse of the family, as they should be. My message is, Everybody should be concerned about that because it's not strictly a religious issue. It's not strictly a social issue. The health of the family is an economic issue. Why? Because it's deeply intertwined with upward mobility. If you look at any indicator, lifetime earnings, high school graduation rates, college attendance, kids who grow up in intact families fare better than kids who either are born out of wedlock or have broken homes. The data is absolutely clear on this one. So I want to remind people that the family is not strictly a social issue. It is not strictly a religious issue. If you care about the American dream, it's an economic issue that is deeply intertwined with mobility.
You know, that really leads to another issue that you've talked about, and that's the erosion of the work culture that we've had here in the United States that's really propelled us forward over, decades. But is that not just an issue of maybe the disadvantaged, but also issues of the overly advantaged?
Meaning
that trust fund babies that sit on their butts. You know what I'm saying?
Well, look, in any free system, you're going to have the accumulation of wealth, and you'll have people who are born into a lot of wealth and don't need to work. In the long run, this tends to not be sustainable because this wealth is dilapidated, and you need to build it up. So, to me, I don't. There's nothing unfair about inheriting a lot of money and not doing anything and just spending it. And maybe that's not how I would choose to lead my life, or that's not how I'd want my kids to lead their lives, but it's not unfair. The problem I see is the cultural indicators we're sending in movies, in television, in books, in newspapers, that work, if you'll pardon my French, kind of sucks, and that going to the office every day is really for suckers, and that it's okay to just lounge around with your friends. I think that's a very, very bad message to be sending to people. We need to have a culture that is robust when it comes to work, that encourages, extols, and honors hard work, and we need to have a corollary sense of shame with people who don't work. If we don't have that today as much as we once did, I don't think it's the result of some trust fund babies not working as hard as they do. I would point the finger much more at Hollywood and the corrosive message they send in the movies, the sitcoms, where all these grown men are depicted who aren't really working. And it legitimizes indolence, and the people who are most in need of sound cultural indicators are the poor. And we're doing a profound disservice to these people and to the country as a whole by legitimizing such behavior. I really think when it comes to work, we should speak in one unified voice and make it clear that America is the land of labor. This is where you come. It's a country where you work. Benjamin Franklin was once sent a letter by a European aristocrat who wanted to immigrate to the US. And he said, "Can you tell me about this country?" And Franklin summed it up this way. He said, "America is the land of labor." People here work hard, and they extol work, and they view with shame the notion of not working or living off of handouts.
A final question about income inequality. You say we should focus less on that top 1% and more on the bottom 5 to 10%. Explain yourself.
When I was a kid, my father would always tell me that if you look into someone else's plate, it's to make sure whether or not they have enough to eat, not to see whether they have more than you. I think this should be the guiding principle. If we're going to look at how much other Americans are earning, it's not to be envious of their success. It's not to complain about how they've made it. It's to make sure that everyone has enough, both in terms of what is it like to be poor in America, in terms of absolute material conditions on the ground, and second, what are the opportunities that are available? If you are born into the poorest families in America, do you still have the opportunities to move up, or are you trapped in a failing school system? So I think whenever I hear someone complaining about the top 1%, my answer is, I don't care about the top 1%. I want to know how the bottom 1% are doing. I want to know how the bottom 5% are doing, how they're doing both in terms of the quality of their life and in terms of the opportunities that are available for them to move out of the bottom 1% and make it into the top 10, 20, 30, or you name it.
David Azerrad, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
You can keep up with us throughout the week. Just head to okhorizon.com, where you can see more of any of our stories, read our reporters' behind-the-scenes blogs, see what others are saying about us on Twitter, and face the facts with our regular updates. So reach out and touch us anywhere and anytime.
Well, not everyone shares Mr. Azarad's opinions on the distribution of wealth here in the United States, especially my next two guests. Kate Ritchie is with the Oklahoma Policy Institute, where she studied the state's growing income gap, while Ryan Kiesel is a former state lawmaker who now heads up the Oklahoma chapter of the ACLU. Ryan Kiesel, Kate Ritchie, thank you so much for being here. Well, my first question is kind of an open-ended one. Is it harder to be in the middle class in Oklahoma today than it was in years past?
It is. I definitely think it is. In terms of the room that the average family has in their budget, it's harder. People make less money in real terms, and their essential items that they have to buy are more expensive.
So Ryan, why is that?
I think that we've seen a shift in the burden of subsidizing state expenses and services. In the last several years, we've seen attempts, and this year we saw the passage of a tax cut that's going to benefit disproportionately higher income earners in the state of Oklahoma. But to keep up the illusion of continuing to provide state services, we've shifted the cost of a lot of those services in the form of fees onto those very individual families that are less capable of paying for that. And so while we've seen income inequality grow, we've also seen a reduction in services that allow middle income and lower income families to get a foothold in the economy.
Are either one of you as concerned about what's happening to the upper income individuals as to what's happening to lower and middle class? And by that, do you care if the rich are getting richer?
I mean, I care in this if it's at the expense of people who don't have enough to subsist. So if the rich are getting richer on the backs of working people who at the end of the day can't take care of their children or pay their bills or put food on the table, then yeah, I care. I don't think that is anything that most Americans or most Oklahomans would call fair, and it's unnecessary. If you have enough money and sufficient assets and you work hard for them and you're upper income, you deserve it. You know, there's no reason why anybody who is upper income in that way doesn't deserve what they have or isn't entitled to it. But if it is done at the expense of and with total disregard for the needs of others, then I don't think that's acceptable.
From a policy perspective?
Yeah, I think studies have shown that Americans realize that there's going to be some inequality. If everyone were equal, we would have what most economists would consider some sort of socialism. We don't want that, apparently. But I think that most Americans realize there's going to be some inequality. However, I think most Americans and most Oklahomans would be surprised to see how radical and extreme that inequality has become. And so it's not necessarily a matter of not caring about the fact that the very wealthiest Americans and the 1% of those wealthiest Americans are monopolizing much more of our nation's wealth than at any time in our nation's history. But as Kate said, it's coming at the expense of the lower income. And frankly, while I wouldn't say that I don't care about the higher income folks, they have access to the political means to have their voices heard in state legislatures and in Congress that lower income Americans and Oklahomans just simply don't have at their disposal.
So does this boil down to the fact that maybe the lower income Americans or lower income Oklahomans just do not have the same constituency that higher income people would?
Absolutely they don't. And higher income Americans and Oklahomans need to realize that it's in their best interest to have a strong middle class. You know, at some point, the disparity that we're realizing between lower income and working class Oklahomans and the higher income Oklahomans that's going on in our state right now will catch up with our state's overall economy. We've already seen examples of where that's impacted our economy both at the state and the national level. The real estate bubble and the lending crisis that was the catalyst for the latest economic meltdown that we saw at a global level had its roots in economic inequality. And so even those folks at the very high income levels, they have an interest in ensuring that the inequality that's going to exist in any sort of a capitalist economy is inequality and is an inequality that's not to the extremes that we're seeing today.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with on both counts. I think that low-income people do not have nearly as much representation that's coming from, someone who works every day representing the interests of low and middle-income working Oklahomans. Their priorities, both because they work during the day, work 1 or 2 jobs. You don't have time to go down to the Capitol or call the newspaper or, gain as much knowledge or education about whatever policy issue that might be best for you and your family. There's just so much time and energy that they would have to invest in that, and they don't have that because they're working just to earn, a subsistence wage. So we definitely see in the work that we do as a voice for low and middle income Oklahomans, we're often a sole voice representing them. It's definitely true. And at the same time, Ryan is right. It is in everybody's best interest that everybody makes enough money to get by. And when we have these yawning, growing gaps in income and wealth, over time, the people at the top and people who earn the most and have the most assets will begin to see that erode and deteriorate in a variety of ways. The primary way is that everyone else is a consumer of either the goods that they produce and is participating in the economy that they're invested in. So when you have this large weight at the bottom that can no longer purchase goods, that can no longer pay taxes, that needs help, putting food on the table, needs to be enrolled in a social program, that creates a weight on the economy that will drag everybody down eventually.
And when we talk about constituencies, we're talking about political constituencies that exercise power in a couple of ways. The higher income Americans exercise power predominantly through money, and the influence that money has on elections and politics, I think, is no secret to anyone. But lower income and working class Oklahomans and Americans have traditionally exercised their political power through organization. And what we've seen is a concerted effort over the last several years to limit the political power of low-income Americans and Oklahomans. And we've seen that through voter ID laws that disproportionately impact the political power of low-income folks. And we've also seen it through the elimination of early voting. And Kate said people don't have time to go to the Capitol and lobby their legislators because they're out working. Well, having 1 or 2 days to participate in an election is also a burden for some folks. We can have all the laws protecting voters in the world, but for some people, they just cannot afford to take that time to go sit at a polling place, especially if they have long lines. So rather than expanding opportunities so that our electorate is more representative of the entire population and the entire everyone in the economy, what we're seeing is a concerted effort to limit that constituency and limit their political power.
Could income inequality, could it be self-perpetuating in the fact that it's harder for someone that is poor to get the education that they may need or some of the skills training that they may need?
That's definitely true. So this is the 3rd year in Oklahoma that the state has defunded adult education. The state now appropriates $0 to GED prep classes, basic math and literacy, and ESL. So I think $2.3 million. We've spent the same amount for about 10 years, which enables in every county in Oklahoma somebody who wants to gain the basic skills either to get a entry-level job or maybe to go on to career tech or to college. They can get that for a very little cost. That will soon be a thing of the past in Oklahoma. We are not investing in providing the opportunity that folks that are very low income need. And it doesn't cost very much to make those public resources available. But for somebody who does not have the skills to get even an entry-level job or maintain a minimum wage job, there is no way to step up. There's no stair for them to step up the economic ladder if we don't invest in that.
And when we think about, is it harder, is it self-perpetuating, I think it's self-perpetuating for a larger number of Oklahomans today. And I say that if for no other illustration is the middle income family that used to be able to send their kid to college and have their kid graduate from college without any debt. Now we're seeing middle income families where college education, which is almost a requisite for a lot of these service industry jobs that are the kinds of jobs that allow you to get ahead, has been priced out of the market, or people graduate with staggering amounts of student loan debt. Student loan debt now combined surpasses consumer credit debt in our country.
We have one of the highest student loan default rates in the country.
Yeah.
Oklahoma.
Here in Oklahoma? Really? So, are there solutions?
I think so. I think investing in those front end public structures that provide anybody whether you are very, very low income, middle income, upper income, everybody should have access to, if they want to get ahead, have access to the basic means to get there.
Kay Ritchie, Ryan Kiesel, thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Next time on Oklahoma Horizon, we look at how Oklahoma's farmers and ranchers are recovering from a lingering drought.
Agriculture is not an indoor sport, and farmers and ranchers have dealt with the elements and nature for as long as they've done the industry. And you know, it's just part of what we know that we have to deal with.
Plus, we remember an Oklahoma ranching legend on Oklahoma Show for the Heartland, Oklahoma Horizon. Well, we are out of time. I'm Rob McClendon. Thanks for watching. See you back here next week.
Horizon is made possible by the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology Education and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping good people grow good things. Thank you for watching Oklahoma Horizon.